Good evening. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to Shanghai American School students, parents, faculty, alum, administrators, board members, leaders of the Hangzhou Community Church, members of Historic Shanghai, and of course, friends of the school. 我要向上海美国学校家长、老师、校友、管理人员、理事会成员、国际礼拜堂的领导，以及所有来这个学校的朋友们，表示热烈的欢迎。Today we celebrate Shanghai American School Founders Day. As a new member of Shanghai American School community, I have heard often and frequently of this school for its outstanding place in the international school community. But my own personal connection was a bit different and a bit strange, you might say. I was in Singapore at the time, and I was working on a doctorate from the University of Southern California. And I had one professor who was very dear to my heart. She was a specialist in educational innovation and organizational change. And I became very good friends with her. Actually, I asked her to become my dissertation chair because of the respect that I had for her. She had this unique ability to bring very disparate voices together into one room, to understand and appreciate ambiguity, and to bring this woven tapestry of different voices, appreciating each and every different color and tone of voice, into one common tapestry and a piece of artwork that reached a common goal, all in one voice. And just that specialty of it, for me, was so special to see Dr. Sinton, her ability to do that. And as she went to Singapore for their last class that she was teaching of the doctoral cohort, we went out to dinner, and I told her that I would be moving to Shanghai and that I would be coming to this school. And she smiled, and she had a slight twinkle in her eye, and she said, I knew that school. She said, my mother, her sister, was at Shanghai American School as a student, and my father, his brother, was Val Sut, who kept this school going during the years when it was at a small community church and they moved just across the street. And so now it's with a bit of irony and serendipity that I stand before you today in that same space that Melora had talked about in Singapore. And as I'm coming to know this community and to appreciate what is unique about Shanghai American School, I see that so much of what I valued in Dr. Melora Sunt is what I'm learning to value here at Shanghai American School today. The ability to see the beauty and ambiguity, disparate voices coming together into one tapestry, and bringing forward new voice and new life for educational innovation moving forward. It's a great honor now that I would like to introduce to you our head of school, Marcel Gauthier. This is Marcel's third year as head of school. Marcel received his Bachelor of Arts from Dartmouth College and holds a Master of Fine Arts and Poetry from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. Please welcome Marcel Gauthier.
It's interesting that you happen to mention that I have a Master's of Fine Arts, because I want to begin this talk with a reference to a poem. It's a famous American poem called The Road Not Taken. And it's a poem that tells a very short story. There's a gentleman who's remembering a moment in his past, and he's in the woods and he's looking at a split in the trail, and he has two choices. And he looks down one trail, and he looks down the other, and he realizes he wants to take the trail that has been less traveled. But they look, in fact, exactly the same. And he has to make a choice. And then the poem switches to the present moment, and he says, years from now, I shall be telling this with a sigh, ages and ages hence. I took the road less traveled, and it has made all the difference. Many people, when they hear those lines in isolation, believe this is simply a poem about being different, an adventurer, forging your own path, to take the road less traveled. But the fact is, it's actually a poem about history and how we remember history. Our speaker in that poem realizes at that moment that the story he wants to tell is a very different story than the actual history he experienced. And yet he knows he has to tell a story, and the story he's going to tell years from now is going to be very different from the present moment. And the reason I raise this poem is it speaks to a couple of themes that I think are important for today. And the first theme is the idea of looking back. We live in a world that seems to travel at a breakneck pace. We communicate across miles and miles in a heartbeat. Here in Shanghai, we're seeing dramatic change, week by week even. The global economy is changing. Our students, when I think of the access to information that they have now, and I think about my own days in school in the 1970s and 80s, I am dumbfounded by the pace of change and overwhelmed by the kind of access to information they have. We change so fast, we live in the moment. And we live in the moment for the future. Which is why it is so important that we look back. And that we identify, the Shanghai American School, our roots in history. Because to look back and identify our roots in history and understand it and celebrate it is in fact to claim our present moment as a school, to understand how did we get here? What history did we inherit? What was the spirit of those times? And how has that spirit, without our even knowing it, informed our choices in the last 20 years when we reopened in 1980? The fact is, the history that you're going to hear in a little bit of multiple campuses, multiple names, adapting to history and the times, even the story of how this church supported Shanghai American School at multiple times in history. Those stories are in fact full of the same spirit that enriches Shanghai American School now. They're full of resilience. They're full of this absolute commitment that education is the most important thing that we can deliver to our children, no matter whether it is a time of hardship or a time of plenty. It's a spirit that suggests that the greatest thing you also can give is kindness and compassion, and that passion for learning can never go away. As we look to the future in this moment of Shanghai American School, how we educate now is, of course, very different than how our students were educated in 1940, 1945, and yet in some ways it's not different at all. We still ground our work in the liberal arts. We still ground our work with a very strong sense of mission, and we still ground our work in the idea that every child has remarkable potential and that we are working for their future. Whether we're talking about the Innovation Institute, project-based learning, or even terms like transdisciplinary transfer goals in education that seem to transcend simple, common English, the fact is we're actually talking about the same thing. And the idea is, how do we now do justice to our kids' lives at Shanghai American School such that they will thrive in the moment and thrive in the future? The opportunity on Founders Day for us to reclaim our story, own our story, and allow it to inform our future, the energy and spirit of that future, is an opportunity that we take annual. It's an opportunity we cannot pass up, because it reminds us that we came from a past where many people served at the school. We live in a moment where our community is here and is the school, and we in fact are building the school for the future going forward. I'm honored to be here today. It's exciting to be in this church. It's wonderful to have the opportunity to have a family with us who we will introduce you to soon, who were part of the reopening of our school in 1980. Also wonderful to have as honored guests here as well. And so, as I turn over the microphone and we start talking about our history, I want you to think about these last lines. I shall be telling this with a sigh, ages and ages hence. I took the path less traveled, and it has made all the difference. With a reminder that all of us will have the opportunity and should embrace that opportunity to think ahead and know what story we want to tell. Welcome to Founders Day at Shanghai American School. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay? Excellent. To tell the story about the journey that the school has traveled through the different campuses requires both hands. So I just want to make sure to have the right microphone. We're going to talk about that journey that we went through the 12 different places that we've called home. But what you'll notice is it's not necessarily a story just about places. It's very much about the people who helped get us to where we are today. As many of you know, we started on September 17th, 1912, in the Hongkou neighborhood of Shanghai, just north of the Bund. Our first campus was just 2 buildings. Each of them cost $18 per month U.S. And it showed in the facilities. The neighborhood of Hongkou was chosen partially because that's where a lot of the American citizens were, American expats and other expats. But the other part of it was, according to our founding fathers, the location would keep our students from, make it easy for our students to get to the church and to business sections without passing through parts of Shanghai that are not desirable. I suppose I don't have to tell you at this point that we were started by missionaries, and it shows. I mentioned that the facilities weren't particularly nice, as you might expect from a building that costs $18 a month. And it wasn't. Heat came from coal stoves that only got to about half the building. Hot water needed to be carried upstairs by hand. For our students who boarded with us, they were offered hot baths just twice a week. The activities, the athletic facilities weren't a heck of a lot better. In fact, they were non-existent. Fortunately, we were just down the road from Shanghai's second largest park, Hongkou Park. And there our students use the swimming pools and the tracks and the athletic fields. Yes, the shooting gallery as well. It was a very different time back then. You can still actually go to the park where our students first competed. It's now called Mushun Park. If you've ever been to a Shanghai Shenhua game, a soccer game, well, you walk the grounds where our students first competed. We started with those 2 buildings, but ended up going to about 12 buildings within a very short time. And so by the early 1920s, we realized it was time to build our own campus. And so we came to this neighborhood, and we built our very first campus. I'll show you a picture of it right when it was opening. As you'll see, it's surrounded by farmland. This was the very western edge of a neighborhood at the time called Frenchtown. And as you see, it was largely farmland. You see the plane trees that canopy all our streets were just being planted right when we moved in. The architecture itself, for that we hired a man named Henry Murphy. Henry was an American architect, but a lot of his most famous work was very Chinese style. He spent most of his professional life doing Chinese buildings. He built a lot of the University of Shanghai's buildings. But for ours, his inspiration went straight back to the States, specifically to Independence Hall in Philadelphia. And if you look at Independence Hall on the left and our administration building on the right, you'll see that Henry Murphy probably should have been suspended for plagiarism. Our students were really excited about the new campus. They couldn't believe there was hot water. They couldn't believe it came out of these pipes, which just goes to show how bad that $18 a month building was. Just before you start thinking that we were too posh at this campus, I'll point you to this picture here. When we finished construction of the campus, we realized that the grounds were really uneven based on all the construction. The quad, all the athletic fields. And so we made all the students steamroll the campus by hand. How many SAS students do we have here? Anyone? Yeah, we've got a few. All right. Well, this is actually a tradition we're going to start coming this week. So, very excited about it. Please wear comfortable shoes. You can put your hand down. The campus on Hengshan Lu was basically like being in a Kodak ad. And I mean that literally. This is the campus as it appeared in a Kodak ad during the 1940s. While we had a lot of athletic facilities there on the campus, we also used different facilities around the city of Shanghai. A favorite was out near the old race course. It's now the People's Square, where our women's field hockey team would play, our boys football team would try and play. They ended up having to play against the Army and Navy quite often. It was a little bit of a harrowing experience. But by far the most architecturally significant part of this campus was the water tower. So the campus was built in 1923. The water tower didn't get finished until 1925. But once it did, it was a working water tower all the way up until 1926. So it never really worked very well as a water tower, but it worked wonderfully as a beautiful architectural signature of the campus. Later on, it became a popular thing for students to sneak into the water tower, climb on up the stairs, and carve their names on the wooden rails up in the water tower. Isn't that right, Betty? One of our special guests today is Betty Barr, who is part of the class of 49. She and her husband George are joining us. And Betty can tell you more about this campus than we could possibly fit into today's presentation. So if you get up for questions, please do ask her a few questions. Well, the campus still stands, or at least parts of it do. The administration building is just outside the doors here, off to the left-hand side. In front of that are the alumni gates, courtesy of the class of 1932. The girls' dormitory is still there as well. It's not visible from the street, but it's just off to the right. As for the water tower, that's still here as well, and it still doesn't work. The cool thing about the water tower is it's only 70 feet high, and yet it's actually affected the skyline of Shanghai. And I say that because when it came time for the Shanghai Library to be built, the architect knew that this building had to be pretty big, and he wanted to make sure it was fitting in with the rest of the neighborhood. So he took little cues from around the neighborhood. And what that architect will say, the architect of the Shanghai Library will say, is that the rooftop of the Shanghai Library, you can see it a bit better on this screen here, the rooftop of the library is actually paying homage to the SAS water tower. So if you ever want to see the effect that SAS has had on the city of Shanghai, just look up. Campus number 3 takes a bit of explaining. So imagine it's 1941, it's in the spring, the U.S. isn't at war yet, but it's looking like that's an eventual conclusion. And the managers of SAS make the difficult decision to close the school. And that should have been the end of SAS. There was a man named Frank Unc Chaney. Unc Chaney is kind of the spirit animal of SAS. He came to the school in the mid-1930s. As a teacher, and even then you could kind of see this incredible spirit that he had. During the Battle of Shanghai in 1937, Unc Chaney hitched a ride on a French warship as well as a Japanese warship just to get back to campus in time to teach. Speaking to the spirit that Marcel was talking about earlier. So when Unc Chaney heard that the school was going to close, he decided, nah, this school must go on. And so Unc Chaney brought us to the bootleg SAS era, where he basically just kept on creating SASs under various names to keep the school alive. The first one was called the American Private School. If you look closely in that banner in the back, you can see a little APS. That's on the side of the two SAS banners. Now, these bootleg SASs were basically SAS curriculum, materials, faculty, staff, And when we could, it was the SAS campus as well. And so it began in the fall of 1941. The bootleg SAS was right on the SAS campus. But by the end of that semester, the U.S. and Japan were at war, and by the middle of the next semester, some Japanese soldiers decided that they liked our campus even more than we liked our campus, and they very politely asked us to leave. And that should have been the end of SAS, but we had Unc Chaney, and that was not the end of SAS. So Unc Chaney took the whole operation, headed across the street to that building there on the right, which is the building that we're now sitting in here at the church. The church and the school had a great relationship going way back before it was even built. Before this was constructed in 1925, we would actually hold services at the school until the church was complete. Once it was, obviously, church services were held here, as well as Girl Scouts meeting, Boy Scouts meeting, occasional plays, and what have you. The connection actually goes even a little bit deeper. Take a look at this. This is the prospectus from our school in 1921-22. This is when we're trying to raise money to build the campus. And if you look closely, you'll see that original plot of land actually is a triangle across the street from Avenue Peyton at the time, now Heng-Shang-Lu. And that little triangle is where this church now sits. Allegedly, we sold the land to the church. It's a good thing we did because we needed a place to go. And so Unc Chaney brought the bootleg SAS experience right here to the church. As you might imagine, it was not wonderful facilities. They talked about how there was one big room and they would just kind of section it off with curtains to create different learning areas. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get through, at least until 1943. In 1943, the occupying forces of Shanghai decided to round up most of the foreigners and ship them off to internment camp. Betty and her family and the other British citizens headed off to Longhua Civilian Assembly Camp, I think is what they were calling it, along with J.D. Ballard, who went on to write Empire of the Sun about his experience there. Meanwhile, Unc Chaney and the Americans headed a bit north, just north of Suzhou Creek, and headed to Jiabei Civilian Assembly Camp. And that certainly should have been the end of SAS, and it certainly was not. Because while everyone else was packing up things that we would need in the internment camp, sort of life's necessities, Unc Chaney was packing books, thousands of books, because he was going to open a bootleg SAS right there in an internment camp in the middle of the World War. And on the first day of that school, there were 222 students. This is super cool. This is actually an illustration done by one of the internment camp residents of the school. As you see, there's not any huge buildings or any huge facilities. The main structure was a gardening shed with a tin roof, and if it ever rained, they had to shut off all lessons until the rain stopped, because otherwise no one could hear anything. The conditions were probably best described by a guy named R.J. McMullen, who was one of the leaders of the campus at the time. McMullen said, I get up, look outside, and if the shed's still there, I walk outside. I see if the tables and the benches are still there. If they are, I ring the bell and we hold school. That got us through World War II, and you can still walk the grounds of that internment camp. Today it houses the East China Normal University campus. Well, the good news, the war's over. It ended in the summer of 1945. And the managers of SAS immediately got together and said, we're going to reopen SAS in the fall of 1946. And Unc Chaney said, no, the school must go on. It must go on now, many years from now. So he opened yet another internment camp. No, that was a bad idea. Yet another bootleg SAS. Now, he would have liked to have used the old SAS campus, but the Japanese troops have been replaced by U.S. troops. Here are some of the Navy personnel at our campus in January of 1946. So instead, we came back here to the church yet again and started the year here, ended up the year across the street back on campus. 1946 to 49, we were back on our old campus and having some wonderful years, but it only lasted about 3 years. At which point, in 1949, when the State Department and other government departments were recommending that citizens head on back to their home countries from Shanghai. Now, Unc Chaney had left the school in 46, but as it turned out, we had a great successor in our midst. The man that Chris mentioned earlier, a man named Val Smith. And Val's son came to the school in 1948 as a vice principal. And in 49, when he heard the school was going to close, he said, nah, the school must go on. Harnessing the spirit of Uncle Shane. And so he did. He created the last of the bootleg SASs right here at this church. If you look closely at this commencement program, you'll see that about 2/3 of the students had withdrawn by the end of the year. And this was the last time, until today, that SAS has gathered with its church. 68 years, 3 months, and 25 days. And when that commencement ceremony was over, we did finally close our doors. And that gets us to campus number 5, and some nice song. So let's put that aside and jump to campus number 6 and talk about how that came to be. It's 1979. China and the U.S. are becoming friends again, and the State Department is realizing that they need a consulate location and fast. So they tasked a former ambassador to Singapore, a U.S. ambassador to Singapore, to lead the search for a consulate location. The very first place that he sees is this beautiful villa. Allegedly, it was built by some of the leaders of the Jardine Mathis Import Company, and it was perfect for a consulate. And this former ambassador thought it was even more perfect when he got up to the 3rd floor and he looked out the window and he saw the most beautiful old brick water tower. And he sort of smiled, thinking, that's my school. Stapleton Roy, State Roy, went to school with Betty here in the late 1940s. He went on to become the U.S. ambassador to China, and he is the reason why, 30 years after closing our doors here, we opened the mere 317 steps. The consulate location was chosen for its suitability as a consulate, not necessarily as a school. But the State Department realized we needed a school pretty quickly as well. It's a part of the school's history that hasn't been particularly well documented. Fortunately, we found a plaque with a name on it that we hadn't recognized, nothing about it in the history books or anywhere else. And the name was Linnea Lauer. So we did a quick Google search, came across a consular on an island off the coast of Washington, and shot her a note and said, hey, by chance, have anything to do with the refounding of SAS? And her first words back to us were, you found me. And she went on to describe this labor of love of restarting Shanghai American School. You make me cry. I'm happy to welcome back Linnea, her husband Tom, and 3 children, Nathan, Kirsten, and Matt. Welcome back, Brian. There's some dispute of the consulate location itself and what constituted the school. We know it was a converted dining hall. We suspect it used to be a horse stable. But it was enough to get the school going, and we do know that it restarted with 7 students, 3 of whom were Lauers. And it was the Lauer family that really gave us the best peek into our campus, campus number 6. Don't worry, Kirsten, I won't show you grades. From Linnea, we learned that the students absolutely love going to school at SAS. And when asked why, Linnea said, because they have nothing else to do. From Kirsten, we learned that the facilities were pretty rudimentary. That if you wanted a hot lunch, you had to bring some food in the morning, put it on the radiator, and maybe by lunch you'd be warm. From Nathan, we learned that you really shouldn't use swear words in front of your principal, especially if your principal is your mother. Related to that, Nathan holds the distinction of being the first student at the reformed SAS to be suspended. And from Matt, now Matt was the youngest, he was only 7 years old, but from Matt we learned something really interesting as well. We learned that while the students were really excited to go be educated at the consulate, in September of 1980, the consulate was not quite ready for them. And so there was a campus before them, campus number 5, at the, I'm sure I'm butchering the pronunciation, Gascone Apartments over on Fajardo, where the Lauers lived. There was an apartment that they used as a temporary facility, a school facility. until we could move on over here to the consulate. If you were a foreigner here in the early 1980s, Gascogne was kind of the cultural epicenter of foreign life. It's a beautiful Art Deco building built in 1935. As to student life, school life, at the apartment, the only insight we got was from Matt, who said, "I just remember books kept arriving." Once we got into the consulate grounds, during those years we were largely supported by a lot of our corporate partners and some early investors, multinationals here in Shanghai. The school was led by a woman named Claire Brooks from 83 to about 87. Claire's husband, Stan, was actually the U.S. Consul General. And so they had a lot of sort of official dinners where Claire would hit up the business leaders for donations for the school. As Claire likes to say, people hated sitting next to me. One of the donations that she got was to build a jungle gym, which became the sort of signature part of our campus on the consulate grounds. The reason why, it doesn't seem like any great shakes, but this was actually the only jungle gym of its type in all of Shanghai, and it was a fascination among all the locals. We were at the consulate for about 9 years, and at the end of the 80s and 89, we had 43 students from 14 different countries, which is enough to outgrow your space in the consulate, but not quite enough to actually build your own campus. And so we decided we were going to share a campus with a local school. This was not just any local school. The Shanghai No. 3 Girls' School is a really famous school here in Shanghai. It was a merger, a merger between St. Mary's Hall, which started in 1851, and McTier School, which started in 1892, and merged in the early 1950s. Among the prominent alumni of this school include China's famous Song sisters. And even the campus itself was quite famous. It was a very early work of a Hungarian architect named Laszlo Hudek, who went on to build over 50 buildings here in Shanghai, including some of our most notable buildings. The space that we used on the campus was not Laszlo Hudek original, but what we lacked in architectural significance, we made up for in cross-cultural opportunity. This is a letter from our leader, Michael Williams, to his family in the Christmas time of 1989. And in it, he talks about life at the campus on Jiangsu with the Shanghai No. 3 Girls' School. And he talks about how the local students were so surprised when they showed up one day and realized the campus had been invaded by Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We taught them about Halloween, and their students taught us about Chinese culture in a much richer environment than we might have gotten had we built our own campus. So while we were getting richer in our sort of cross-cultural and academic experience, we also wanted to make sure that we continued to grow from an athletic standpoint as well, really providing a good, well-rounded education. So we made a really bold move. It's 1995, we're sharing space with the local school, and we decided we're going to be a founding member of APAC, the Asia Pacific Activities Conference. That might not seem particularly bold, but think about this. We just joined an athletic conference with no actual athletic facilities. Bold move, but we had a lot of confidence because, man, were we growing. When we first went onto that campus, we had one building. We soon had 2 buildings. We tore the roof off that second building, added a floor, put the roof back on. A couple of years later, we built the third building. We were growing quite fast, and we also added a high school division. And if there's one thing that the leaders of the girls' school don't like, it's boys. And so having a bunch of high school boys around, combined with the fact that we continued to grow, meant that once again, we needed a place to go. By the way, the Shanghai No. 3 Girls' School remains one of the most prominent schools and respected schools here in Shanghai. So pretty neat partnership there. Now the school at the time was run by a man named Ron Montgomery. He ran the school from 92 to 99. That's 7 years, constitutes the longest run of any leader in SAS. And that stability came at the perfect time, because it allowed Ron to really become the architect of modern day SAS as we looked to figure out where we were going to go next. And we had some interesting options. Or should we build another campus in Puxi? Should we start to recognize that a lot of the growth and excitement of the city was now happening on the Pudong side of the river? Or should we go even more ambitious and build SAS Nanjing, SAS Xiamen, SAS Hangzhou? All three of those cities were asking for SASs of their own. Apparently they didn't realize what the first S stood for. Nevertheless, we were one of the very few times in our history as a school, we did not choose the most difficult option. But we chose a tough one. We were going to build 2 campuses from scratch at the same time on both sides of the river. And by the way, we still didn't have any place to stay. Hence, we started the Pit Stop campus era. This was an era where we used temporary housing until our permanent campuses could be built. The first one of those was on Huaxialu, on the Pudong side. This represented the school's first presence on the Pudong side since we opened up in 1912, a mere 94 years earlier. It was a temporary campus, but man, it didn't look like that. This is our building. I should point out that it was more than $18 a month. We have two floors in this building, which they even gave us a proper sort of formal entrance as well, because they were happy that we were there. On the Pudong side, a good chunk of the land there was still a construction zone, and so as a result, our community really connected in ways that they might not have if they had other sort of distractions. And that sort of tight-knit community continues to be visible and be felt on our Pudong campus. Deb Karmozen was the original leader of SAS Pudong, and she describes a popular field trip that they used to take. And I mean that field trip in a literal way. They would take a trip to a field. But it wasn't an ordinary field, because before you get to this view, you pass a billboard, and the billboard shows what they're building, which was the SAS campus in Pudong. 2 years after that open field where Deb used to say that wild buffalo would be roaming around, they had a golf course and a bunch of homes and a school. You can still see the Huaxiao Cultural Center, which is what our campus was part of. You can still see the upturned rooftops off to the left-hand side when you drive over to the Pudong campus. Ironically, there was a cultural center which played a role on the Puxi side as well, although it wasn't quite as beautiful. It was an abandoned project that the government friends and partners that we had said we could turn into a school for a while. And so we did. We took over a building that was basically a shell with no electricity, no plumbing in March of '96. And then by September of '96, we have what looks like a purpose-built campus. Don't let the look fool you. We were too big to even move in, and then continue to grow after that. Just to put it into perspective, our swim team had to share their pool with other guests at the Holiday Inn in Shanghai. The classroom space was also at a premium. We had a couple of different sort of temporary trailers. When we outgrew those, we went across the street, took a look at some storefronts and said, yeah, this could be classrooms. And we turned the storefronts into classrooms. And the students and faculty of this era will talk about the challenge of getting to class dry because all the laundry would be dripping down on them every day. You can still see this campus as well, and get yourself some great dumplings because it's a mall now. Sorry. Who has been to the Shanghai Center? The Portman? Yeah, a bunch of you. All right. Well, congratulations. You have been on campus number 10. Because as it turns out, in 1996, we're building we're using these pit stop campuses. They're off in Puxi and off in Pudong. And there were some members of our community who said, hey, what about downtown? We want SAS to continue downtown. And so in '96, we opened the Pit Stop campus in the Shanghai Center. And by the end of that semester, we realized that the other 2 campuses were serving us just fine, and it closed after just 1 semester. So just think about where we're at here. Tony Horton, who led the school from '99 to 2005, said, in '97, the Puxi campus was a rice paddy. In '96, the Pudong campus was part of the East China Sea. In 1998, we began moving into both. The first was in Pudong. And this was our first purpose-built campus in 75 years since we moved in across the street. Those of you who are familiar with the campus might recognize the elementary school stairwell. That building housed elementary, middle, and high school when we first began. Then the architectural brief for that campus was actually to build a high-end North American-style school with elements of traditional Chinese architecture, which is why when you walk in there, you have a very symmetrical sort of courtyard design. I mentioned this sort of tight-knit community earlier, and that really comes out on the campus as well. There's a nice plaque to Ron Montgomery, the architect of modern-day SAS, as well as his wife Vicki. There is a gym up on the second floor known as the Hatchery, named after Len Hatch, who's one of the beloved teachers who passed away. And then if you go up to the second floor in the auditorium, there's the Chow Hua Foyer, and that is not named after a former leader or a big donor. That is named after a couple of beloved shifus who have been working with the Pudong campus since way back when we were on Huasha, the temporary campus. I don't know where Mr. Chow is, but there you are. Thank you. So this is kind of interesting. When we started to do research for the campus, we got a tour of the Huasha location. And this person who was showing us all these wonderful pictures of the school at the time, very knowledgeable, and it turned out to be none other than Mr. Chow himself. This campus opened in 1998, but the building continued all the way up until 2015 with the addition of the Performing Arts Center. And while some of these projects were a little bit delayed, they really benefited from learnings that we had in the similar projects on the Puxi campus, which brings us to the 12th and final campus in Puxi. It was sort of a migration. It started in 1998 with the high school, but all three divisions weren't over there until the year 2000. Interestingly enough, the architecture firms that we used for both campuses are really quite famous. Our Pudong campus architecture partner has come on to be the darlings of the tech world. They have built headquarters for Google, Tencent, Alibaba, and Amazon, among others. On the Puxi side, they're quite well known as well. They've partnered with some of the architectural greats, everyone from Mies van der Rohe to Santiago Calatrava. The plan was actually not to have two architecture firms, though. The plan was actually to take the Pudong campus blueprint and just build it twice. Unfortunately, our famous architecture partners gave us a famously high price when we decided to go with someone else. And that's really why the campuses feel often as different as they do. There are some really lovely threads of consistency. One is that no matter which campus you go to, you're greeted by a Minggu statue. This was a gift from the class of 2012 to celebrate our 100-year anniversary since being on Sichuan. The only difference between the two eagles is the head position. The Pudong eagle looks off to the right across the city of Shanghai to the Puxi campus. The Puxi eagle looks off to the left, returning the stare to Pudong. Today, under Marcel's leadership, we don't talk about building new campuses, which is good because this talk's been long enough. What we talk about is transforming traditional classroom spaces into dynamic, visible, collaborative learning spaces. All under the inspiration of our SAS Space Manifesto. It says if the space delivers everything that we expect, it hasn't been pushed far enough. Which speaks to the ambitions of this school. This was in the background of the first slide that we started with. This is the SAS motto. We found it as early as 1916, back when we were sitting on the $18 building in Sichuan. And the definition of it is, since we think we can, we can. And I think when you look at the path that we followed, and you look at the challenges that we took, and the risks we took, and the obstacles that we overcame, you see that we've done a pretty nice job of living up to it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Peter. We are also honored today to be joined by Sean Stein, the U.S. Consul General here in Shanghai. Mr. Stein previously served as Consul General in Shenyang, where he developed a program that became the model for the U.S.-China Tourism Year, which was a presidential initiative to attract Chinese tourists to the U.S. He has also served tours in Lagos, Jakarta, and in Chengdu, China. Please welcome Consul General Sean Stein.
Thank you, Chris. I have a confession to make, which is maybe only appropriate because this is an academically affiliated audience. And the confession is, I have a great staff. And whenever I have a great staff, that means whenever I need to give remarks, they prepare very nice, erudite, eloquent remarks. And they make sure everybody agrees, and they clear them, so it's all beautiful. Well, I left them home. So, Marcel, my dog ate my homework, and I'm sorry. But the good news is, they were about 10 minutes. And I think 10 minutes is probably about 9 minutes longer than you may want to have at this particular point. So let me just say a few things. First of all, thank you very much for the kind introduction. What I would say is that if I look back at the things that I've done, there's one thing that is somewhat significant. And that is, back when I was in Chengdu, we had a problem. It was a problem not unlike the problem that the Laoers faced. We had one child of school age at the consulate, and we saw that some 8 months hence, we were going to go from one child at the consulate to 14. And we needed a school, and we needed it now. And so Kevin mentioned how back when SAS was being formed, how Nanjing came, and probably Hangzhou, and everyone else came. One thing that he didn't mention was there was a young management officer in Chengdu named Sean who also called to say, hey, how about we set up a CAS? And of course he said, no. But we did get a school. Nothing like SAS, but maybe someday. She mentioned that I previously served in the Northeast, served in Northeast China, on the wrong side of the Great Wall. And at that time, the city that we were living in was very keen to attract foreign investment. Not just any foreign investment, they wanted good, high-quality, impressive foreign investment. They wanted to be on the map. And so at that time, a major American company, a global company, but an American company, was preparing a very large investment. And they had done a beauty contest all over China to figure out where this major investment was going to be. And so it started with 10 cities, and it became 9, and it became 5, and finally became 2, and the city of Shenyang wanted to know what it would take to get that major investment in Shenyang. And so, as big companies do, they sent out the survey team, and they found that in Shenyang, in fact, Shenyang had the best workforce for what they were looking for. It was close to the market, the price was right, suppliers were there, everything pointed to Shenyang. So I remember actually having dinner with the mayor of Shenyang and gave each other high fives because we knew we were going to get the project. But guess what? We didn't get the project. The project came to Shanghai. And I remember talking to the head of this American company, who in fact is still in Shanghai, by the way, and I asked him, I said, what went wrong? Why was it that even though supply chain costs and everything said you should go to the Northeast, why did you choose Shanghai? And he said, it was easy. It was my project, and my kids were going to go to SAS. So, great cities, and Shanghai is a great city. Shanghai is one of the greatest cities of the world. It's the great city in Asia. Great cities require great schools. And without great schools, you can never have a truly great, truly cosmopolitan, truly international city. And so, as the pioneer of international education in Shanghai, as the founder of the international education movement in Shanghai, no single institution can take greater credit for helping Shanghai become what it is. But you don't have to listen to me or believe me for that. I remember the first time I met with Ying Yong, the mayor of Shanghai. He was very gracious. He was hosting a group of diplomats. And he said something I think was interesting, and something that I think he truly believed. He said, if you look at China, we have many great places, many wonderful cities, and they're growing so rapidly. We have Beijing, we have Shanghai, we have all this. But do you know what makes us special? Do you know why we, in Shanghai, are able to do what no one else has done? He said, no. And he said, it's because we are where, if a bank wants to open a branch, they don't go to Beijing, they come to Shanghai. If you have a high-tech company that wants to invest, they don't go to Xi'an, they come to Shanghai. And he gave example after example. And he said that what gives and what created and what has given Shanghai its modern flavor and what's helped it become the city today is its large international and expatriate population, which is larger than the international and expatriate population of any other city in all of China. And so he said, so I want to thank you, Consuls General, for making that happen. And I want to thank your Chambers of Commerce, and I want to thank your schools for making it possible for people from all over the world to come and make Shanghai their home and to make our city beautiful, wonderful, modern, and great. So I too would like to thank Shanghai American School for the extraordinary contribution you made, not just educating children of the consulate, not just educating the American kids that live here, or the children from the dozens of countries who go for truly world-class education at Shanghai American School. But also because I think the mayor is right, that without the Shanghai American School and the movement that was started by the Lauers and others and the tradition of great international education here, Shanghai truly wouldn't be the city it is today. Thank you.
Thank you for those kind words. I have a couple of presentations I'd like to make as we close this ceremony. And first, I'm going to ask Linnea Lauer to come forward here for a moment, please. At Shanghai American School, as you now know, of course, we have 2 campuses and close to 2,800 students. In 1980, in September, when we reawakened, when Linnea reawakened Shanghai American School, how many students did we have?
3.
3 students. And during your time here, it grew to how many students?
I think when I left, it was 15.
15 students. 15 students. When Linnea arrived, one of the first things she realized for her own children, and for the most important thing is education. And I think that spirit of realizing how important, how powerful school is and can be in shaping the lives of children has informed just the amazing growth and spirit of Shanghai American School in the years hence. And so I want to thank Linnea for reawakening Shanghai American School in 1980, and also welcome your whole family here, and want to let you know, and hopefully you've had a couple of days to see this, we stand proud and successful right now here in Shanghai and are deeply appreciative of your bringing us back into being in 1980. Thank you so much. Stay here for one minute. One other presentation. We are in this beautiful church, and as you've heard, several times in our history, the church has played a key role in allowing Shanghai American School to continue. And we're honored today to have two representatives of the church, Pastor Guo Fengwu and Karen Kwan from the Overseas Liaison of Shanghai Christian Church. Pastor Fengwu is the Associate Secretary General of the Shanghai Christian Council. I would ask them both please come forward for a moment. And I want to say, if it was not for the generosity of the church in our history and the sense of welcome, Shanghai American School would have stopped being during that time. And luckily, we had the spirits of the individuals and someone like Ung Cheney who wanted to make sure the school kept going, but we also had people here in this church who welcomed SAS during times of hardship. And as representatives here, I want to thank you and I want to thank this church for playing such a key role in our history. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much for coming to join us today to celebrate the history of Shanghai American School and Founders Day 2018. We invite you to come and continue the celebration with us down the street and just kind of follow the crowd out onto Sasha. So we look forward to enjoying an evening together. Thank you so very much for coming.